She only wanted spare parts. That's all Claire Jensen thought she was getting when she bid on a confiscated shipping container from a seized auction lot. But the moment the doors creaked open, revealing chains, crates, and a mysterious engine hidden beneath a canvas, everything changed. What she uncovered inside wasn't just rare. It was dangerous, classified, and connected to a secret someone was desperate to keep buried. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from, and if stories of hidden discoveries and second chances pull at your heart like they do ours. Make sure to hit that subscribe button because tomorrow's episode will take this mystery even further. The sun beat down hard on the port of Los Reyes, painting long shadows across the sea of metal containers stacked like forgotten puzzles. It was too hot for anything but silence, and yet the old auctioneer's voice buzzed through the humid air like a stubborn fly. Claire Jensen stood near the edge of the yard, hands on her hips, the wind tugging lightly at her ponytail. Her boots pressed into the sun-baked dirt as she scanned the lineup, unimpressed. She hadn't come here expecting much, maybe a busted forklift motor, or a few rusted-out rims she could strip for parts. What she hadn't expected was container #4-1BX. There were no photos listed, no manifest, just a line in the lot listing that read, "Confiscated, no customs records, contents unknown, final clearance." Most buyers had passed on it, too risky. The container had sat untouched for over 5 years, a sealed red box gathering dust under maritime silence. The bidding opened at $100. Claire, half out of boredom and half on instinct, typed in a bid, $500. That was yesterday. Now here she was, standing in front of it, holding the faded receipt and a crowbar. She didn't know what drew her to it. Maybe it was the fact that no one else wanted it. Maybe it was the rust thick, blooming across the hinges like something trying to escape. Or maybe it was the fact that everything else in her life felt stuck, and she needed something, anything, to feel new again. She was 29, a mechanic with more heart than savings, barely keeping her father's old shop alive. Every month, the rent loomed closer. Every job was patchwork brake pads, oil changes, timing belts. No one wanted to fix properly. But standing in front of this sealed mystery, she felt something stir, a flicker, a question. The crane operator came by to unlock the twist locks. "You sure you want this one?" he asked, wiping sweat off his brow. Usually these mystery boxes got nothing but seized junk. Once found a container full of mannequin legs. Claire didn't smile. "I'll take my chances." The doors creaked as she pried them open. One latch popped, then the other. The container groaned, the steel expanding like lungs holding breath. Dust spilled into the sunlight. Inside, it was dark, darker than it should have been for broad daylight. Her eyes adjusted slowly, sweeping past wooden crates, thick rusted chains, and something massive, tucked beneath a sun-faded tan tarp. It didn't move. It didn't hum. But it had presence, like a sleeping animal in the back of a cave. Claire took a step forward. The air was stale, laced with diesel and salt. Her boots echoed softly on the steel floor. She reached out and touched one of the chains, thick, military grade, bolted to the floor with anchors she didn't recognize. This wasn't furniture. This wasn't scrap. Whatever was inside had been locked down with fear. A glint caught her eye. Just beneath the tarp, peeking out from under the edge, was something circular, mechanical, industrial. It was a drive shaft, but not one she recognized. Not from trucks. Not from planes. Bigger. She squinted, tilted her head. "What the hell are you?" she whispered, not expecting an answer. Outside, the wind shifted. The crane operator lit a cigarette and turned away. Claire stood still, staring into the darkened container, her fingers hovering just above the edge of the canvas. She'd opened hundreds of hoods in her life, engines, compressors, gearboxes. But something about this moment made her pause. Not from fear exactly, but reverence, like unearthing something that had been buried on purpose. And then she pulled back the tarp. The tarp slid off with a low hiss, dragging years of dust into the sunlight. For a second, Claire couldn't breathe. Beneath it sat an engine, or at least something shaped like one. But this wasn't from any truck, car, or heavy machine she'd ever seen. It looked like a cross between a turbine and a heart, dense with metal veins and complex tubing, the kind of craftsmanship that spoke of classified work, not factory lines. Her reflection wavered across its surface, distorted by time and grime. The first thing she noticed was the insignia, a faded emblem stamped into the housing. It wasn't American. The letters were Cyrillic. Her brows pulled tight as she traced them with her thumb, whispering the unfamiliar characters under her breath. There were serial numbers too, but none that matched any registry she knew. Around the engine, the floor was lined with wooden crates bound in steel straps. A few had already split open from moisture, revealing smaller mechanical parts packed in straw precision gears, copper wire spools, and sealed metal canisters labeled Propulsia, propulsion. She stepped back, her heartbeat picking up. No way, she murmured. This was old. Cold War. Old. Maybe even older. But how did something like this end up in a confiscated shipping container? And why had it been sealed so tightly that even customs left it alone? Claire pulled her phone from her pocket, snapping a few photos before crouching down beside one of the anchor points. The chains had been welded into place, not bolted, welded. Whoever shipped this wanted to make sure it didn't move an inch. Beneath the welds, she could see scorch marks, almost like someone had tried to cut it loose once and failed. She rubbed her wrist, uneasy. A sharp clang echoed outside metal hitting metal. She spun around, squinting into the blinding daylight. Nothing. Just the wind brushing through the maze of shipping containers, making them groan like old ships at sea. She turned back, the air now heavy with the scent of oxidized metal and salt. Something inside, one of the crates rattled. Claire froze. The sound was small but deliberate, like a shift in weight. She waited, pulse drumming in her ears. Then silence. Probably a rat, she told herself, though she didn't believe it. She knelt, pried open the lid with her crowbar, and found not a rat, but more documents water-stained, rolled into canisters, each stamped with red wax seals bearing military codes she didn't recognize. She picked one up. The seal cracked under her thumb, and the paper inside was brittle, filled with schematics, jet turbines, thruster diagrams, mathematical notations that looked too advanced for their apparent age. This wasn't junk, it was history. She sank back on her heels, mind racing. If any of this was real, if it was military-grade tech from the Cold War, it could be worth millions. Or it could get her arrested. She didn't know which thought scared her more. Her father would have known exactly what to do. He'd worked on engines during his service quiet contracts. Nothing he ever talked about much. Some things aren't meant to be fixed, he'd told her once, late one night when she was 12 and asking about the strange blueprints he kept locked in his desk. Back then, she'd thought it was just a mechanic's caution. Now, it felt like a warning. She ran her hand along the engine's cold surface. It hummed faintly under her touch, not alive, but charged, like residual energy sleeping just beneath the metal. She drew her hand back quickly, breathing out a shaky laugh. "All right," she muttered. "You've got secrets." Behind her, the crane operator called out. "You good in there?" Claire blinked, stepping out into the sunlight. "Yeah," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Just found something interesting." The man smirked, taking a drag of his cigarette. "You, and everyone else who buys a mystery box." She gave him a small nod, trying to act casual. But her mind was already far from this place, already planning how to get it back to her shop without anyone asking questions. Whatever this was, it wasn't just old metal. It was a key to something, and keys always open doors best left shut. It took 2 forklifts, a flatbed trailer, and more than a few questioning stares, but by nightfall, Claire had the engine back at her shop. She told the port workers it was a scrapped industrial compressor she planned to break down for parts. It wasn't a total lie, she would take it apart. But not yet. Not until she understood what exactly she was looking at. The bay lights buzzed overhead as she stood alone in the center of her father's garage, the huge shape resting on timber blocks like a sleeping artifact. The rest of the shop, wrenches, hoists, half-finished repairs, faded into the background. All she could see was it. The engine. Claire pulled on a pair of gloves and circled it slowly. In the cleaner light of the shop, she could see things she hadn't noticed at the dock's micro-welds along the side housing, temperature gauges labeled in Celsius, and strange screw heads shaped like six-pointed stars. It was alien, but purposeful, brutally elegant, and the more she studied it, the more it didn't make sense. "This doesn't belong in a cargo container," she muttered. She found a panel along the side, bolted shut with sealant still intact. It took her 20 minutes to carefully break it open. Inside was a control array, wires wrapped in braided insulation, dials that weren't quite analog but definitely not modern, and etched, just beneath one cluster of switches, was a line of faded text. Novi Resuet. She tapped it into her phone's translator app. New dawn. Claire stepped back. The phrase rang like a bell in her head. She'd heard it before in one of her dad's old notebooks. Buried between sketches of turbines and pressure systems, he had written something once. Never finished. Cold project. New dawn never flew. She hadn't thought much of it at the time. Just another project that didn't pan out. But now? Now it felt like the center of a storm. She grabbed the crate that had held the sealed blueprints and opened the remaining documents. Page after page of diagrams, propulsion models, and power ratings. Not just a jet, not just a missile. Something more. A hybrid, a prototype. One note read, dual-axis pulse ignition, magnetic isolation housing. She blinked. That wasn't aerospace, that was experimental. Her breath caught. This engine wasn't just rare, it was impossible. The kind of thing universities theorized about, maybe toyed with behind closed doors, but never actually built. Not with 1,980 seconds tech. Not with any known tech. She looked at the massive central intake again and saw something else, a scratch, just beneath the seal. Someone had tried to grind off a serial number. She took a flashlight and angled the beam. The imprint was still there, faint but readable. S divided by N, 002. Do not activate unshielded. Claire stepped back instinctively. The air felt heavier suddenly. Or maybe that was just her own pulse, thumping loud in her ears. A knock sounded at the shop's front door. She flinched. No one ever came this late. Not unless it was a breakdown emergency, and even then, they called first. She hesitated, pulled the door open a crack, and found herself looking at a man in a buttoned shirt and dark jeans. He looked plain. Too plain. Like someone trained to blend in. Mid-40s. Crew cut. Eyes that didn't blink enough. "Can I help you?" Claire asked, heart still thudding. The man smiled, but it didn't touch his eyes. "Hi. Sorry to bother you this late. I'm looking for Claire Jensen. This is Jensen Auto, right?" Her instinct screamed. "Yeah, that's me. I represent a client who believes you may have come into possession of something that was lost in transit." He reached into his jacket slow, but deliberate, and pulled out a photo. It was of the engine, taken inside the container. Dated 3 days ago. Claire didn't move. "I bought it fair and square at the port auction. You can check the records." "Oh, we have," the man said calmly. "We're not disputing the sale. We just want to ask a few questions. May I come in?" She stepped halfway into the doorway, blocking his view. "Not tonight." His smile didn't move. "Tomorrow then?" Claire didn't answer. She just closed the door, slow but firm. She stood in the silence for a long time, watching the man walk back to a car parked across the street. Not a van. Not marked. Just forgettable. When he drove off, she turned back to the engine and whispered to herself, "What the hell did I bring home?" The engine sat in the center of her shop like a time bomb disguised as scrap. Claire hadn't slept. She'd pulled her father's old notebooks from the filing cabinet in the back room and spread them across the workbench under the same flickering light he used to read under. She hadn't opened these since before he died. They still smelled like oil and old tobacco, faded pages stained with fingerprints and time. Flipping through the yellowing pages, she searched for any mention of New Dawn. And there it was, scrawled in the margins of a diagram. Novi Resuet, untested hybrid tech, stolen before Phase 3. Below that, another line, Port of Novorossiysk, 1987, disappeared. Claire's fingers hovered over the words like they might burn. Her father had been involved, maybe peripherally, maybe directly. But it was clear now. He'd known about the engine, maybe even worked on it. The knock on her door last night hadn't been a coincidence. Someone knew the container had resurfaced, and now she had something more dangerous than stolen hardware. She had a thread that connected decades of silence to her own bloodline. She opened another crate. Inside were folders stamped with the Soviet star, sealed with crumbling wax. She peeled one open. Technical specs filled the pages labeled with designations like MK2 variable thruster array and cryo-coil pulse unit. The language was clinical, but the margins told another story. Handwritten notes, corrections in English, and initials she recognized. R.J. Robert Jensen. Her father. Her breath caught. A blueprint slid loose from the folder, curling at the edges. She smoothed it flat. The lines were exact. The drawings, beautiful cross-sections of a propulsion system designed for a craft that didn't match any known silhouette. It was sleek. Too small to be commercial. Too complex for war. She turned the page. A hand-drawn note was clipped to the back. If they bury it, they bury the truth. But this engine, it flew, Claire. Once. She stared at it for a long time. Her father had never talked about his time overseas. Not really. Just fragments. Tired eyes. Late-night murmurs about things best left in the past. She'd assumed it was just the weight of being a soldier. But this wasn't just memory. It was a secret he never intended to take to the grave. Outside, the street was still. Inside, her shop buzzed with quiet electricity like the engine knew it had been seen. Claire gathered the papers into a box, taped it shut, and carried it into her office. She didn't know what she was going to do yet, but she knew one thing for sure. She couldn't ignore this. Not anymore. The past was no longer in the rear view. It had landed in her bay, and someone out there wanted it back. The van appeared again the next morning. Not the same one, but the same feeling, beige, boxy, too clean for the dusty road that led past Claire's shop. It didn't park. Just slowed down as it passed, windows tinted, no plates. Then it disappeared around the bend, swallowed by the tree line like it had never been there. Claire watched from the bay window, coffee cooling in her hands. Her heart thudded in that same quiet panic she hadn't felt since the day of her father's funeral. The kind where grief isn't loud, it's cold and waiting. She'd barely slept. She hadn't even opened the shop. The sign still said, "Closed." And for once, she meant it. She locked the door, pulled the blinds, and double-checked that the container was still chained inside the garage. It was. Untouched. Still silent. But everything around it felt loud now. Too loud. Even the birds seemed to know something was off. By noon, she'd gone through every document she'd found. The more she read, the less sense it made. One file described a theoretical launch attempt over the Black Sea. Another showed hand-sketched diagrams of a testbed vehicle, something triangular, sleek, with magnetic stabilization no one was using back then. And yet the materials matched the ones right in her garage. Still, it wasn't the technology that haunted her most. It was the name she found written in looping cursive at the bottom of a personal note, clipped to one file. Jensen, R. Clearance level. Vostok 7. Her father had a clearance level? For what? And why hadn't he ever told her? The floor creaked. Claire looked up, heart pounding. It came from the back door. The one no one used. The lock was old. The bolt barely held. She moved quietly, grabbing the wrench off her bench like a weapon. The shop was too quiet, the kind of silence that holds its breath. Another creak. She rounded the corner, and the door was ajar. Just an inch. Just enough. She lunged forward, yanked it open. Nobody. Just footprints in the dust. Fresh ones. Leading away into the gravel lot behind her shop. Tire marks. Wide, shallow van width. She ran outside, but the road was empty. No sound. No engine noise. Just wind and the faint smell of exhaust. Back inside, her stomach dropped. One of the crates was open. It hadn't been before. She rushed to it. The microfilm canister was gone. The one with the red seal. The one that had held the blueprints with her father's annotations. Everything else was there. Just that one piece removed. Cleanly. Whoever had been here knew exactly what to look for. She backed away from the crate slowly. Hands trembling. Breath shaking in her chest. This wasn't just about an old engine anymore. She wasn't just being watched. She was being handled. And someone somewhere was already one step ahead. The knock came just before sundown. Not a bang. Not the cold, polite tapping from the man with the photo. This one was slower, measured 3 soft knocks, then silence. Claire peered through the side curtain, fingers tight around the crescent wrench still resting in her hand. A man stood on the porch, older, late 60s, maybe early 70s. Worn jacket, dusty boots, shoulders square. He wasn't a suit. That much was clear. He wasn't afraid either. Claire cracked the door just an inch. "We're closed." The man gave a short nod. "Name's Harris," he said. "Used to work for the 74th out of Wright. Pat. Saw your engine." Claire's breath caught in her throat. "What engine?" His eyes narrowed, amused but not unkind. "The one sitting in your bay, wrapped in a lie, and chained, like a prisoner." She hesitated, opened the door a little more. "You were military?" "Still am," he said quietly. "Just not the kind they write newsletters about." Claire let him in. She didn't know why. Maybe it was the way he looked at the floor when he walked in like he'd been here before, in another life. He walked up to the engine without asking. Ran a hand along its housing, like a man touching a tombstone. "Haven't seen one of these since '89. We had one on a tarmac in Bavaria for 3 days before Command Black. Bagged the whole hangar." "You're saying this was real?" Claire asked. "My dad, he wrote about something called New Dawn." Harris nodded. "Project Novi Reswet. Hybrid pulse propulsion. Cold War Hail Mary. Designed for short-range orbital launches. Untraceable ignition. No flame signature. Only 2 were ever built." Claire stepped closer. "You said 1. What happened to the other?" "Test flight in Siberia," Harris said. "Crashed on re-entry. Pilot didn't make it. The Soviets buried everything. But not before a few components leaked out black market stuff." "Your container?" He whistled low. "That's more than just junk. That's history someone thought was destroyed." Claire rubbed her temple. "Someone broke in last night. Took a reel of film. Microfilm." Harris didn't flinch. "Then they know what you've got, and they're not going to stop." "Who are they?" He looked at her, jaw tight. "Depends. Could be remnants of a program we never admitted existed. Could be scavengers working for defense contractors. Could be ghosts. These things, they don't stay buried. They haunt." Claire sank onto the edge of her workbench. Her father's name. The letters. The blueprints. It all felt bigger now. Too big. Harris crouched down beside the engine, pulled a patch from his jacket pocket. It was circular, frayed, and marked with a black sun rising over barbed wire. No country name, no text. "Your dad," he said, placing it in her hand. "He wore this. We all did. New Dawn wasn't just an engine. It was a choice." Claire looked at the patch. Cold cloth, warm weight, and in that moment, the truth settled in her chest. This wasn't just her inheritance. It was a mission someone died to protect. Claire didn't open the shop for the next 2 days. The open sign stayed flipped. The lights inside stayed dim. and her phone went straight to voicemail. Outside, the world carried on engines sputtered down the road. Delivery trucks clattered by, but inside her garage, everything had slowed to the stillness of decision. The engine loomed in the center of the bay, a sleeping relic she couldn't forget how to wake. Beside it, the box of blueprints sat unopened since Harris left, the patch folded neatly on top. She hadn't told him to leave. He just had, after laying down the truth like a weight on her shoulders. She spent hours sitting with the engine, not fixing, not analyzing, just being near it. She thought about taking it apart, piece by piece, scrapping it, selling the metal, pretending none of it happened. But every time her hands moved toward her tools, she saw her father's face, not how he looked in photos, but how he used to be in the shop, quiet, focused, carrying something invisible in his silence. Had he wanted her to find it, or had he spent years keeping it hidden? The questions swirled around her like oil in water. She pulled one of her father's notebooks off the shelf, the old one with the leather cover and grease marks on the spine. She flipped to the back pages, the ones she'd never bothered reading before. Tucked inside was a small envelope. Her name was on it, handwritten. Inside, a single-page letter. Claire, if you're reading this, it means I didn't finish what I started. I kept the truth from you, not out of shame, but to protect you from carrying it. There are things I built that I regret. New Dawn is one of them, but it was never meant to be a weapon. It was a chance, a new way to fly, a new way to hope. If you choose to finish what I couldn't, do it your way. Don't let them tell you who it belongs to. You've always had the hands for building, but it's your heart that makes it matter. Whatever you decide, know that I trust you more than I ever trusted myself. Love always. Dad. Claire read it twice, then a third time. By the end, her hands were trembling, the page soaked with tears she hadn't realized were falling. The letter didn't tell her what to do, but it told her she could do it, and that changed everything. She stared at the engine. She could stay quiet, pretend it wasn't her problem, live a normal life, fixing busted radiators and timing belts. Or she could find out what her father built, what they tried to erase, what the world wasn't supposed to know. The choice wasn't easy, but it was hers. And that night, for the first time since she opened the container, Claire picked up her wrench not to dismantle, but to begin. By morning, the garage smelled like copper and coffee, the old blend of creation. Claire had pulled the tarp off the rest of the crates, clearing space, organizing notes, building a map of what little she understood. It wasn't much. Just fragments of propulsion theory and materials she'd never handled, but her father's voice echoed through every scrawled formula and sketch. It wasn't just science. It was faith in steel. She laid the blueprints across the workbench like puzzle pieces. Some were faded, others burned along the edges, but they all centered around one component, the drive core. A sealed unit with magnetic coils and pulse induction regulators, far beyond anything commercially available in the 80 seconds, or even now. Most pages bore stamped approvals in Russian, coded references, and notes signed by engineers long forgotten. But a few had been blacked out. Name lines, project credits, oversight initials all scratched or redacted. All except for one, a diagram of the propulsion stabilizer, signed in thick black pen, and beneath the scratched-out name, barely visible in the paper's grain, was something faint. She grabbed her father's old lamp and tilted the page under the warm glow. Slowly, the pressure indentations came into view. They formed 5 letters, J-E-N-S-E. Her breath caught. The last letter was gone torn by a blade, or erased by time. But it didn't need to be there. It was her father. He had signed this, officially. They hadn't just hidden what he worked on, they had removed him from it entirely. Claire staggered back from the bench, heart pounding. Whatever Project New Dawn was, her father wasn't just a contributor. He'd been central. Then someone tried to make it look like he never existed in it at all. Why? She looked toward the container again. The engine seemed to loom higher now, as if standing with her. Claire returned to the final crate, the only one she hadn't opened since Harris warned her to be careful. It was heavier than the others, bound in leather straps and locked with an old steel clasp. She pulled out her grinder and cut through the metal slowly, sparks flashing like fireflies in the dim garage. Inside was a sealed aluminum canister, labeled only with a string of digits and one word: Ogon. Fire. She pried the lid open and found reels of microfilm. Not just 15 of them, each labeled with phase numbers, PHASA through PHAS5, blueprints, test logs, launch coordinates, and on the final reel, a scanned signature. She held it up to the light. Robert Jensen, lead technical engineer. Clearance level, Vostok 7. Her knees nearly gave. Her father had buried this in a box meant to be forgotten, but now it had found its way home to her. She wasn't just his daughter now. She was his last witness, and maybe the only one left who could finish what he'd been forced to leave behind. Claire didn't leave the shop for the next 24 hours. She barely slept. The world outside faded to background noise as she dove into the microfilm reels, using her dad's old magnifier and a dusty projector she hadn't touched since high school. The images blinked to life on the office wall, ghostly frames of blueprints, logs, and stills from a time she hadn't lived through but now felt buried in. She saw test chambers, isolated launch pads, technicians in winter gear, snow crusted around scaffolding, men in suits standing beside vehicles shaped like arrows, triangular crafts designed to break the edge of the atmosphere. The propulsion system was central to it all. It wasn't built for war, not directly, but if you could reach orbit silently, you could spy, you could strike, you could disappear. Phase I was design. Phase 2, prototyping. By Phase 3, they had assembled a functional test core, the engine now sleeping in her garage. Phase 4, according to the reels, was a small-scale flight over remote Kazakhstan. And then, silence. No Phase V, no final report. Just a single note, handwritten at the bottom of the last frame. Project terminated. Personnel reassigned. All physical assets to be destroyed. But her father hadn't destroyed his part. He'd hidden it. The container, the blueprints, the engine, they weren't accidents. They were preservation. And not just of technology, of truth. Claire sat back, dizzy with it all. She suddenly understood why Harris had said what he did. This wasn't about finishing a machine. It was about recovering something the world had tried to forget. And then came the noise. Not a knock this time. A low rumble from outside. She rushed to the window just in time to see the beige van return, only now there were two. They parked across the street, doors closed, no one emerging, just sitting, watching, waiting. Claire stepped away from the window, hands shaking. She wasn't afraid for the first time. She was angry. They were here to erase again, to clean up what had resurfaced. And this time, she wouldn't let them. She opened her dad's notebook one more time. On the last page, there were no formulas, no sketches, just a short line. If they come for it, don't run. Finish it. That's the only way it lives. Claire turned to the engine. The wires, the coils, the stabilizers, all sleeping, all waiting. She made a decision. If they wanted it gone, she would do the opposite. She'd rebuild it, get it running, prove it worked, and then tell the world her father's name belonged beside it. The shop lights buzzed overhead as she rolled up her sleeves. From across the street, the van stayed still. She smiled without warmth. Let them watch. She wasn't hiding anymore. She was building, and this time, she'd finish what they tried to bury. The shop was alive with light. Sparks danced beneath Claire's hands as she welded the final housing into place, the pulse core clicking softly in the background like it was breathing again. She'd worked through the night, into the next, sustained only by her father's notes and the kind of stubborn fire he'd passed down in his blood. Outside, the vans were still parked unmoving, unannounced like wolves circling the edge of a campfire. But Claire didn't care. The engine was awake, and she was nearly done. Each component she restored revealed more than just metal. It revealed intent. Her father hadn't just preserved the engine, he had refined it. Quiet upgrades, hand-lathed fittings, magnetic shielding that even modern engineers would kill to reverse engineer. It wasn't just a remnant, it was a masterpiece, one that had never had a chance to fly, until now. She moved around the shop with purpose, syncing the diagnostic leads, calibrating the pulse regulators, cross-referencing blueprints by hand. The first ignition cycle would be small, contained. She wasn't trying to launch a craft, not yet. She just wanted the world to see it breathe, to prove it could. At 3:17 a.m., the system passed its final internal check. Claire stood back from the terminal, hands trembling, heart hammering like a drum in her ears. The switch was old, brass-plated, her father's initials etched beneath it in tiny letters. RJ. She took a deep breath and flipped it. For a moment, nothing. Then a low thrum. Subtle, like the shop itself had exhaled. The lights dimmed slightly as the engine hummed, a quiet, harmonic vibration building from within. The core lit soft blue at first, then deepened into a pulsing violet. Claire stepped closer, her chest tight with awe. It was working. It was real. The impossible was no longer theory. The silence outside broke. Van doors slammed. Footsteps. She didn't move, didn't flinch. When the shop door burst open, 3 men entered black coats, radios, no insignias. One of them stepped forward. "Shut it down," he ordered. His voice was sharp, trained. Claire didn't even look at him. "You had your chance to bury it," he advanced. "This is national security. You don't know what you're playing with." "Yes, I do," she said calmly, never looking away from the humming engine. "I'm not playing. I'm finishing it." The men moved toward the machine, but the moment they crossed the marked threshold, a high-pitched warning blared part of the failsafe her father had designed into the system. One of the men stopped cold. "She armed the containment field." Claire nodded. "Smart man, my dad. Built it to defend itself." They froze. For the first time, she saw fear in their eyes. Not because of what the engine could do, but because she understood it, and that meant they couldn't erase her. Behind her, the violet glow steadied, purring like a heartbeat. Claire turned toward them. "This doesn't belong to you," she said softly. "It never did." And in that moment, standing between her father's legacy and the men sent to silence it, she realized something. The engine didn't just live, so did she.